What about those tubes on her face?
They had to do with controlling the spaceship.
You stupid.
They're not.
What's 9 plus 10?
21.
And I have developed a formula, which is a roach extract, which I have been taking along with my subjects for the past year.
I'm not missing.
Planted deliberately by the CIA in order to convince the public that any leaks about Apollo 20 would be dismissed as hoaxes.
Hello and welcome back to the final tier of the Hoaxes Iceberg. We have finally made it to the deepest recesses of hoaxdom, and on this tier we've got some incredibly strange and kind of hilarious entries, from fake Apollo missions, bumping uglies in space, bizarre biblical interpretations, and a somewhat strange peanut butter based moral panic. So enough of my yapping, let's get into it. In May 1981, in the Soho Weekly News, an alternative newspaper based in New York, a strange announcement appeared nestled within the classified ads. It told readers to be prepared and that mankind is destroying the earth. But fret not, whoever took out this strange ad declared that something called metamorphosis was the answer, that roaches were the race from above, and if you're interested in being piqued and you wanted more information, then there was a telephone number to call. This confounding classified was soon followed up by a press release that declared metamorphosis to save mankind with roaches. The one-page diatribe spoke of an evolutionary program that was founded by a man who called himself Dr. Joseph Greger, but he was no ordinary doctor. He claimed to have been busy breeding a strain of super roaches that were immune to just about anything you could think of: infectious diseases, environmental changes, radiation, and even the simulated destruction of the ozone layer. Greger announced that in February 1980, he'd made a major breakthrough, one that could change the trajectory of life on Earth as we know it. Not only had he bred these super roaches, he'd also managed to synthesize a super roach extract that he had converted into a capsule form. Cockroach pills, if you will. He said that he'd been administering these pills to a band of loyal and willing patients who'd been guzzling them down with glee, reporting that they had a resurgence of energy not felt since childhood. Another baffling announcement followed, this time a press conference that was held in his laboratory. It was supposedly filled with cockroach art and memorabilia, and there's a photograph of Dr. Greger proudly wearing a t-shirt with a roach on it as he presumably advocates his miracle cure to the waiting press. These combined stunts gained him media attention, with write-ups in the Philadelphia Daily News, the New York Post, and the story was picked up by United Press International. Soon enough, it was a nationwide story, with an article written by Ed Lyon published in almost every newspaper across the United States. It claimed that Dr. Greger had around 70 followers and that they had a manifesto that reads like the group's version of the Bible. Greger was quoted as saying, "As man has caused poisons to rain down about the bald-head of the cockroach and its fellows, so have the multinationals rained toxins and unbelievable horrors upon our heads. But we shall follow the path, the true paths led by our brethren." Now, I'm not going to lie, it kind of had me in the first half. He was cooking something, but then it all got a little bit cult sounding. It's kind of how these things tend to go. But Greger was insistent that this was not a religious cult. They weren't worshipping the cockroach. He wasn't proclaiming himself God, and he had no apparent interest in money. These pills really were a miracle cure, and it wasn't just him saying it. His followers were insistent that taking the pills had helped to alleviate many different ailments, and had even allowed them to eat less food to survive. Now that bit definitely sounds culty. In mid-June, Greger fired off 2 letters, one to the FDA, apparently for the 4th time, asking them to waive the 6 years that were required to approve a new drug application. This was, according to Greger, about saving the human race. There was no time for bureaucracy or rigorous evaluation. People needed these cockroach pills and they needed them now. He reiterated that there was no financial motive, that him creating these pills was pure altruism and nothing more. He also wrote a letter to Dr. James Salmons at the American Medical Association, imploring him to consider using his influence to convince the FDA to bypass the normal procedure and bring the cockroach pills to the market immediately. The attention that Dr. Greger was receiving hit an all-time high when he made an appearance on WNBC's Live at 5.
He is the head of a group called Metamorphosis, and he thinks that cockroaches are very important to all of us. Sue and I are delighted to welcome Dr. Joseph Gregor to Live at 5. Doctor, it's nice to have you with us. Actually, I brought a strand of super roach, which I have developed, which is actually impervious to all toxins known to man.
Well, those are big fellows in there.
Yes, they are.
Huh?
And they're alive, Jack.
They are alive. These are a hissing variety. I've been doing research with the roach, and I have developed a formula, which is a roach extract, which I have been taking along with my subjects for the past year. And colds, flus, virus have all but disappeared.
Gregor's claims didn't just sound bizarre, they seemed downright unbelievable. Suspicions had been brewing ever since he made his first outlandish announcement, with writer Lou Antosh from the Philadelphia Bulletin making the connection between the company name Metamorphosis and the short story by Franz Kafka. The protagonist was even named Gregor Samsa. He decided to do some digging and contacted the editor at United Press International. The editor at UPI in New York was taken aback because this was the second such call he'd gotten. He called up the overnight man who'd written the piece and got back on the line. This guy Gregor is legit. Just a little strange, he contended. Antosh managed to get hold of Gregor's telephone number and naturally rang him up to demand some answers. Gregor admitted that he'd taken inspiration from Kafka's Metamorphosis, but insisted that the entire super cockroach pill creating operation was entirely legit and completely above board. He then claimed that taking the pills had led to a light sensitivity that he was hesitant to talk about publicly, not wanting to scare people off his miracle cure. And that's why he always wore sunglasses. Antosh wasn't convinced, but he didn't have any solid evidence that anything was awry. That was until the real man behind Dr. Joseph Gregor revealed himself. It was early July when writer and film critic Amy Taubin received a telephone call from a man who identified himself as Joey Skaggs, a self-described artist, activist, educator, and notorious media prankster. He claimed to be a fan of her writing and wanted to talk to her about his work. She met him in his apartment where he was dressed alarmingly similar to Dr. Joseph Gregor, and he proceeded to reveal the truth behind this incredibly strange story. The Roach event is a satire involving a cult leader, his followers, and the promise of a panacea, staged for and by the media. I did it to communicate my personal feelings as an artist and a human being. As Joey Skaggs, I couldn't say what Dr. Gregor was able to say and expect the press to report on it. Joey would go on to say that he uses the media as a medium, as a painter would use a canvas, and that his purpose was to make reporters more responsible. Some very basic fact-checking would have shown Metamorphosis and the cockroach pills to be nothing more than an elaborate hoax. But for those in the media, that fact-checking was clearly too much to ask for. It wasn't his first rodeo either. Before convincing the US press that he was a roach-loving cult leader, he'd managed to get them to believe that he was the creator of a brothel for pets, a sperm bank for celebrities, and that he was a shoe shiner on Wall Street who had hit the big time by taking investment advice from his clients. Joey went on to have a long and illustrious career, continually pranking the media, and there's even a documentary about him called The Art of the Prank. Now, I'm fond of a good potato, and I also love when something proclaims to be the world's largest thing. Be it ball of twine, thermometer, or a teapot, I'll be there with my camera in hand having the time of my life. Don't judge me. I'm a sucker for a good roadside attraction. With all that being said, if I was around in 1894 in Loveland, Colorado, I might have been taken in by this next hoax. Farmer Joseph B. Swan was famed for his many varieties of spuds, and according to some reports, his crops had been so fruitful that he'd even been written about in the local newspapers. According to the Museum of Hoaxes, he once grew 26,000 pounds of potatoes in 1 year on a single acre of land, as well as an absolutely whopping one that clocked in at 13 pounds and 8 ounces. This man was truly king of the taters. The Loveland Street Fair was the talk of the town in the autumn of 1894. The dates had been set, and according to the Fort Collins Courier, $500 had been subscribed for expenses and premiums. Nobody was more hyped about this than the editor of the Loveland Reporter, a man named W.L. Thorndike, who decided to team up with Swan to help promote his potatoes and put the Loveland Street Fair on the map in a huge way. The plan was simple. They were going to take a photograph of a regular-sized potato, blow it up to be an absolutely massive size, mount that photograph onto a wooden board, and then take a photograph of Swan carrying this supposed 10-ton tuber on his shoulder. The end result was this photograph. People loved it, and why wouldn't they? Let's be real, it's not every day you get to see a spud of that size. They named the whopping tatty Maggie Murphy and claimed that it weighed 86 pounds and 10 ounces, and that it was too large to eat, only fit for seed. It was a harmless hoax, and although Thorndike and Swan had dreamed it up as a publicity stunt, I'm not sure if they expected the photograph to go quite as far as it did. It ended up in the hands of the Scientific American, who fell for it immediately, publishing the photograph in their September 1895 issue, and their readers bloody loved it. Some of them wanted their own absolutely massive potato and wrote in asking where they could get hold of some seeds. I imagine it was kind of like that bit in Little Shop of Horrors where Seymour puts Audrey 2 in the window at Mushnick's.
Excuse me, I couldn't help noticing that strange and interesting plant. What is it?
Thankfully, in this case, the giant potato hadn't developed an insatiable thirst for human blood. It never existed. And the Scientific American had to admit to their readers that they'd been taken in by a hoax. They weren't happy about it, releasing an incredibly grumpy statement. The photo of the mammoth potato we published on page 199 proves to be a gross fraud, being a contrivance of the photographer who imposed upon us as well as others. An artist who lends himself to such methods of deception may be ranked as a thoroughbred knave to be shunned by everybody. That's a bit bloody much, isn't it? Like, I understand being a little irked that you've been taken for a ride, but the whole thing was in good fun. It wasn't really hurting anyone, except for, clearly, the egos at the Scientific American. The photograph would go on to be printed in the Strand magazine just a few years later, the same magazine that would eventually print the photographs of the Cottingley fairies. Now, as for the world's actual biggest potato, that title is held by Peter Glazebrook from Nottinghamshire, who also grows massive onions and marrows, because why the hell not? When I was a kid, making fake magazine covers was one of my favourite pastimes. I know, absolute nerd. Me and my cousins would draw pictures of our gran as the front cover, and I'm sure that she loved it. That was sarcasm, if you couldn't tell. Those drawings were downright hideous. We even used to call her Granny Pig as well, and we'd draw her as a pig. She must have fucking hated us. Now, I'm telling you all this because I want to say up front, I understand the appeal of creating your own newspaper. And that seems to be exactly what three incredibly affluent and well-connected men did in 1744. The English Mercury was created by the second Earl of Hardwicke, Philip York, along with his friend Thomas Birch, who was a writer and a historian, and York's brother Charles. The newspaper itself claimed to be from 1588, and the creators went to great lengths to ensure that it looked authentic, with details like the typeface being paid extra care and attention. Of course, if the English Mercury was real, then that would make it the first newspaper. Inside its pages, it gave an account of the Spanish Armada arriving in the English Channel, along with the subsequent response. Now, upon his death in 1766, Thomas Birch left his personal writings and papers to the British Museum. And in 1794, Scottish antiquarian George Chalmers stumbled across the English Mercury while digging through these papers, and he held it up as the world's first newspaper. He was quoted as saying, "It may gratify our national pride to be told that mankind are indebted to the wisdom of Elizabeth and the prudence of Burleigh for the first newspaper." The hoax was revealed in 1839 by Thomas Watts, by which time Chalmers was long dead, so he didn't have to deal with the embarrassment or the fallout. Watts went to the British Museum and looked through the same files and papers that Chalmers did, and immediately he was like, nope, something is very wrong here. He spotted Philip York and Birch's own handwriting on the manuscripts, and from that deduced that the entire thing was a ruse. That wasn't his only piece of evidence. I am abbreviating here. And he actually wrote a very long letter to Antonio Panizzi, who was the keeper of the printed books in the British Museum, in which he thoroughly debunked the entire affair. Why they decided to do it in the first place is anyone's guess. But it does seem like rich men in the 1700s got just as bored as I did in the early 2000s. Although there is a distinct lack of terrible grandma drawings in the English Mercury, which, when you think about it, is a damn shame. In the 1970s, Harold Hill was the president of the Curtiss Engine Company, responsible for creating aerospace engines and equipment, as well as supposedly being a consultant on the space program. He hit the pages of the press when he made a series of bold claims about research that was being conducted at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, research that just so happened to confirm his own Christian beliefs. He claimed that while checking the position of the sun, moon, and planets out in space, hundreds of years from now, the computer that the scientists were using suddenly came to a stop. According to him, this computer put up a red signal, which meant that something was wrong with their data. Upon checking, the scientists were startled to discover that they had found 23 hours and 20 minutes missing in space in elapsed time. But luckily for them, one of the scientists on the team had a strong knowledge of biblical history from their time in Sunday school. And they were like, hang on a bloody minute, I know what's going on here. He supposedly remembered this passage from the book of Joshua. Hill claimed that the scientists got further validation when this former Bible school student remembered another passage, this time from 2 Kings, where Hezekiah requests that God moves the sun 10 degrees backwards to confirm that the Lord would heal him. 10 degrees is exactly 40 minutes. 23 hours and 20 minutes in Joshua plus 40 minutes in 2 Kings makes the missing day in the universe. Isn't that amazing? Our God is rubbing their noses in his truth. Could it be that an unlikely group of NASA scientists had been the ones to stumble upon the secret of what was long believed to be simply a biblical myth? Well, the press in the 1970s sure seemed to think so. But sadly, they'd been taken in by a man that was full up to the brim with religious zeal. His story had first made the rounds via church bulletins in the 1960s, and they were more than happy to hear it. For all intents and purposes, Harold seemed to be an accomplished man. I mean, he was a consultant to the space program, for God's sake. Only he wasn't. NASA would later say that he worked very briefly at the Goddard Space Flight Center as a plant engineer, and that in that role he would have zero access to any teams involved in computer simulations or experiments. His story had fallen into the hands of a journalist named Mary Catherine Bryan. Someone had seemingly gone to great efforts to type up this account and mail it off to her, and she became the first person to print it in the news. After that, the story went nationwide, perhaps even global, despite it being completely false and despite Hill never having had the access that he claimed at NASA. But none of that really mattered to the people that read this account and took it verbatim. Hill claimed that he received thousands of letters and that he even had to type up a standard reply for the baying crowd. According to an article by James Keither, Hill later admitted that he got the story from a reliable source and is sure that it is true, but has mislaid his notes and cannot remember exactly where he read or heard it. That's very convenient. But luckily for us, I managed to find where he heard it. His so-called reliable source was most likely a book written in 1890 by Charles Totten, a professor of military tactics at Yale. It was called Joshua's Long Day, and in it, Charles claims to have demonstrated by astronomical calculations that the historical account of Joshua's long day is true. That all sounds very scientific and above board, right? Well, according to an article in issue 141 of Investigator magazine, Totten's actual argument is that the world was created on Sunday, September 22nd, 4000 BC, which the calendar dates as Monday. Therefore, one day was extra long. Totten got September 22nd, 4000 BC from the British Chronological Association, a Christian group led by Jabez B. Dimbleby. Dimbleby published an hour almanac titled All Past Time, which calculated the date of creation by adding up Old Testament numbers. Dimbleby was also a pyramidologist. He believed that the lengths of passages of the Great Pyramid reflect Bible chronology and that the world's end was imminent. He also vehemently criticised astronomers because they treated his writings as nonsense. The article also goes on to highlight how Totten resigned from his post at Yale because he believed that the Antichrist was coming and that he was an Adventist who believed in British Israelism. The story of verifying the so-called missing day, or long day, was later picked up by Harry Rimmer in his 1936 book, The Harmony of Science and Scripture. And he adds a little dramatic flair. He says that a colleague of Totten's found the missing 24 hours and that Totten challenged him to prove whether or not the Bible is inspired and see if the Bible can account for your missing time. According to this account, Totten's colleague comes back all cocky because he's discovered that it's not actually a missing 24 hours, it's 23 hours and 20 minutes. To which Totten retorts that the Bible does not say that the whole day was lost and that it was only about one day. This all sounds a little bit familiar, doesn't it? The story in Rimmer's book is almost identical to Hill's story of NASA scientists discovering the missing day. And Rimmer either made up that story himself or, as the writer of the Investigator magazine article notes, it may have appeared in another text that Totten wrote. Either way, it's not true, and Totten's original writing was clearly influenced by his own belief system instead of so-called scientific research. But you won't be surprised when I tell you that some people still believe this story to be true, thanks to the popularity of Harold Hill's hoax account in the 1970s. He had to know that what he was saying wasn't true because he'd lifted his NASA story from multiple different accounts, stretching back to the 1890s. But as we've learned throughout this whole series, the truth never stands in the way of a good story.
I wanted to be a spaceman, that's what I wanted to be.
In February 2000, French astronomer Pierre Collier had just released his new book on the Mir space station. It was called The Final Mission, and the book was getting attention from newspapers the world over. But they all appeared to be focused on a very small portion of the book's contents, namely his sensational claim that NASA astronauts had been practicing sex positions in a bid to discover which ones are feasible under zero gravity conditions. Of the 10 positions tested, 6 required mechanical help, with the use of an elastic belt and an inflatable tunnel to keep the partners pressed together at the torso, the pelvis, or the legs. The other 4 turned to a more natural approach, in which the couple depended only on muscle power. That sounds like hard work. His source for these salacious claims was an apparent document titled NASA number 12571-3570, which is a very catchy title indeed. Within days, the news report had caught the attention of NASA, who felt it important to let everyone know that they had absolutely zero interest in conducting any sex experiments, and that Pierre had either made the whole thing up or he'd been duped. So, was this NASA document real and they'd just kind of gotten a little bit embarrassed about it and tried to cover it up? Or was the entire thing a hoax? I love doing this kind of setup when the video is literally called the Hoaxes Iceberg. Why do I keep doing it? We already know it's going to be a hoax. Imagine if I was like, no, actually it's real. Ridiculous. The supposed NASA document actually originated in 1989 and was posted on the news groups Sci Space Shuttle and Alt Sex, although it's unclear who actually wrote the damn thing in the first place. The sex experiments were allegedly taking place due to the growing number of married couples that were involved in space station work. Of course, intimacy is important, and NASA didn't want to be the reason that any of these couples ended up getting divorced. So apparently they were trying to find the best way for people to bang in space. The summary of results gave some graphic descriptions of the experiments, some of which would eventually make their way into Pierre's CIA's book. So he'd been taken in by this decades-old hoax, which, upon reading it myself, is so clearly fake that it's kind of embarrassing that he cited it as a real thing in his book. But I'm not going to razz the guy too hard. This was the birth of the internet, and people were incredibly trusting of what they were seeing online. And obviously, as the years have progressed, we've all become extremely media literate, and we're all able to spot fake news and hoaxes from a mile away. Right?
Hey, hey, what do you say? Had me a woman, she ran away. Want me one time, want me twice.
When it comes to rest and relaxation, some people like to watch reality TV or the latest Netflix miniseries. They might read a book or go for a nice long walk. But for me, I like nothing more than unwinding with YouTube live shows that focus on complete nonsense. Whether it's UFO nerds LARPing as late-night talk show hosts, or British paranormal investigators holding round tables about dogmen, I lap it all up like a thirsty mule. I don't know what you want from me, I just enjoy giving myself irreparable brain damage, alright? Now, when it comes to these shows filled up to the brim with disinformation, hoaxes and claptrap, you can't get much better than Linda Moulton Howe's Earth Files. With the help of her two cats, Fluffy and Chocolate, Linda dishes out top secret information that you won't find anywhere else. Maybe sometimes for good reason. At some point in 2018, Linda had been given explosive whistleblower testimony from a man named John Harold Levine, who claimed to work for the CIA and the NSA in the 1970s, as well as working behind the scenes as part of NASA missions 18, 19 and 20, missions that don't exist on paper, but supposedly took place only to later be covered up. Classic Linda rushed to spill the beans to her audience on the Earth Files, as well as on a special 3-part episode of Coast to Coast AM. According to John Levine, the Apollo 20 astronauts investigated an ancient 3-mile-long UFO on the moon, and they found something extremely disturbing inside.
So what is the discussion in detail back in 1976 between you and Commander Rutledge about this extraordinarily beautiful Polynesian-looking preserved female in one of the cockpit chairs?
Neither of us could understand how could she possibly be that well preserved.
And what is it that you're looking at first?
Her skin was all intact, and she was wearing clothing, a dress of some sort, possibly a jumpsuit type of thing. And it seemed to be very much intact. No deterioration at all to speak of.
A wild revelation indeed. Who was this strange woman inside a craft that John Levine claimed was anywhere up to 1 billion years old? Well, back in April 2007, an account called Retired AFB began uploading bizarre videos on YouTube. They came out in different parts, but combined the video was around 20 minutes long. It included close-up footage of the moon, of this supposedly huge ancient UFO, and the body of a female alien, lovingly dubbed the Mona Lisa. The story was picked up by numerous conspiracy theory websites that claimed new secret NASA tapes had been found. And by the end of May, the story got a whole lot more elaborate. Luca Scantamburio, an Italian UFO researcher, claimed on May 25th to have an exclusive interview with the man behind the Retired AFB YouTube account. His name, supposedly, was William Rutledge, aka Commander Rutledge, the person mentioned in Linda Howe's interview with her whistleblower John Levine. Rutledge claimed to be 76 years old and living in Rwanda, and presumably the weight of this secret had become too much for him to bear. He'd been holding on to these Apollo 20 videos all these years, and he'd just had enough of it all. Luca wrote on his website that the public will be the first judge of this story, which could become in the near future the definitive proof that we are not alone in the universe. The interview was conducted over messages, so Luca never got a chance to actually hear William Rutledge's voice, but he gave some very interesting information about the spaceship and the Mona Lisa.
We went inside the big spaceship, also into a triangular one. It was a mothership, very old, who crossed the universe at least a milliard of years ago, 1.5 estimated. There were many signs of biology inside, old remains of vegetation in a motor section, special triangular rocks who emitted tears of a yellow liquid, which has some special medical properties, and of course signs of extrasolar creatures. We found remains of little bodies, 10 centimeters, living in a network of glass tubes all along the ship, but the major discovery was 2 bodies, one intact. Mona Lisa, I don't remember who named the girl, Leonov or me, was the intact EBE. Humanoid, female, 1.65 meter, genitalized, haired, 6 fingers. We guess that mathematics are based on a dozen. Function, piloting device fixed to fingers and eyes. No clothes. We had to cut 2 cables connected to the nose. No nostril. Leonov unfixed the eyes device. You'll see that in the video. Concretions of blood or bioliquid erupted and froze from the mouth, nose, eyes, and some parts of the body. Some parts of the body were in unusually good condition, and the skin was protected by a thin, transparent protection layer. As we told the mission control, condition seemed not dead, not alive.
In August, a series of equally strange comments on an article published about Apollo 20 on a website called Need to Know began to appear. The first was from a user named W. Rutledge, who said that the website was a joke. The second came 23 minutes later from retired AFB, who said, indeed. The third message, 1 minute later, from someone calling themselves Thierry Speth, said, read my speech. And finally, 10 hours later, God decided to check in and comment, I like everybody. That's nice to know. A day later, a very savvy reader of the website traced all 4 usernames to the same IP address. Who was this person and what the hell did they want? It wasn't until a month later that whoever was behind the original posts showed up again, claiming that they'll be bringing the truth out soon. All I can say is, don't rise your hopes. 6 days after that message, they finally confessed that all of the videos were a hoax. Clicking on their colourful username led directly to the website of Thierry Speth, a French writer, photographer and 3D artist. This video was all part of a fictional story that he'd been working on. In short, he'd made the entire thing up. But here's the issue. He'd admitted to it on a fairly niche website. There were only a few other comments besides his, and by that time the entire story had taken on a life of its own. There were new videos being posted under the username Moonwalker1966 Delta, claiming to be from this Apollo 20 mission. But they weren't, and they were obviously fake. It wasn't until 2017 that Chad Baxter actually managed to track Thierry down and got an hour-long interview with him, where he showed the Mona Lisa and spoke extensively about creating the story and about his experiences since. He'd actually published a book titled Apollo 20 The Unknown Mission, which included more details about the trip to the moon and the astronauts involved, including William Rutledge, who was a fictional creation. He spoke about how the footage of Mona Lisa was actually shot in his kitchen, that the model he created was sprawled out across his table, and his inspiration behind placing the bones on her face.
If you have to control a spacecraft, maybe you can use some reflex, some speed, muscles to control. When I'm using the PS4 with the controller, it's not so well, so I wanted something controlled by the eyes, muscles, reflex, little things. It could be a good system to control the spacecraft functions.
Of course, Thierry had been the person behind the persona of William Rutledge and had told this story previously to the Italian UFO researcher Luca Scantamburio via a series of messages back in 2007. The only problem was, when he told that story, he was pretending that it was all real. And now here he was in 2017 admitting that he'd made the Mona Lisa himself and placed the bones there as part of this elaborate story that he'd concocted. It was science fiction and nothing more. An interesting story that Linda Moulton Howe's supposed top secret whistleblower John Levine repeated almost verbatim.
What about those tubes on her face?
Well, William Rutledge believed that they had to do with controlling the spaceship.
That those tubes on her face were controlling from her mind this huge 3-mile-long craft, and she was the pilot, and the gray was like a co-pilot?
Well, they had a control panel that looks like you put your hands on it, and apparently the controls, the ship's computer, interfaced directly with the pilots.
Unluckily for Linda, the real story behind Apollo 20 was no longer confined to a niche conspiracy website. There was an interview. We could see the Mona Lisa for ourselves and the man that created it. And some of Linda's viewers wrote in to tell her that she'd been taken in by a decades-long hoax. But in classic Linda Moulton Howe fashion, instead of admitting that she'd either been taken in by a hoax story or that she'd knowingly spread a hoax video claiming it was true for views and money, she doubled down and blamed the CIA.
Other people are critical. They insist that Apollo 18, 19, and 20 never happened. They are just hoaxes by Hollywood and video game producers. But Hollywood and video game similarities did not exist in the mid-1970s. The much later similarities were no doubt planted deliberately by the CIA in order to convince the public that any leaks about Apollo missions 18, 19, and 20 would be dismissed as hoaxes.
15 days after that video, Linda posted the following statement on her Earth Files website. I am preparing a fact-check update for Earth Files and my December 27, 28, 2018 Coast to Coast AM radio broadcast with the finding that the original November 29, 2018 three-part tale by 71-year-old John Levine that begins below appears to be mostly dishonest for reasons unknown. In the face of contradictory facts, Levine keeps insisting his secret astronaut story is real, even though many of his assertions don't hold up credibly under research scrutiny that will be laid out in my upcoming fact-check updates. John Levine had also provided her with a photograph of a grey alien on the moon that was actually from the video game Area 51.
So this one comes from Steve Cambion from Truth Seekers. On your website, there's a picture of a genuine alien taken to the moon, and the image that you used was from a 2005 video game called Area 51. Cambion, so Steve Cambion is referring to himself in the third person. Cambion from Truth Seekers emailed you as the proof that what you're selling was from a video game, and then you refused to change. So, okay, so whatever. There's some accusations there. Do you mind explaining to the audience what that picture is about, its provenance, and perhaps why you would not take it down if someone showed you it was video game art?
What are you talking about?
So you don't know what is being referred to here with the video game cover art of Area 51 and that being used as a genuine image on your website, apparently.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Why you would end up with some kind of a stupid question like this is beyond me. It's hostile, Kurt. Why would you do this? It's meaningless. What have you done that you've corrected? I mean, why are you playing? Now we're going to trap Linda in some. This is ridiculous.
Now, I don't have access to her subsequent full reports on John Levine that she posted at the very beginning of 2019 because I'm not about to pay $8 a month for the pleasure. But in the snippet I can see, Linda hypothesizes that John Levine may have been a victim of MKUltra and could have been implanted with fake memories of his time as part of Apollo 18, 19 and 20. I mean, I can't even, it's just so ridiculous. She's created her own hoax or fake story on top of someone else's hoaxed version of another hoax. Thierry Speff creates what's essentially an art project and a subsequent fictional book. People go absolutely wild for it online and believe that it's real. And then some guy, because let's be honest, his name definitely isn't John Levine, decides to masquerade as a whistleblower and incorporates the Apollo 20 story in with a bunch of other stuff, goes to Linda Moulton Howe with the story and she's like, yep, I see no problem here. Everything's great. And then when she's busted, she just makes up another nonsense story on top of it about men in black or mind control.
You're accusing me of being some gullible 2-year-old. And I have just celebrated my 80th revolution around the sun.
It's a classic Linda Moulton Howe move, and I genuinely worry for my sanity because somehow I keep watching this absolute garbage. Remember the good old days of Vine? During the early to mid-2010s, it was arguably the most influential app when it came to creating viral moments. that some of us, depending on how old you are, still quote to this day.
I said, whoever threw that paper, your mom's a hoe.
It also launched the careers of Jake and Logan Paul, Gabby Hanna, and David Dobrik, so it can't all be positive. Much like TikTok today, it was relatively easy to have your video seen by millions, thrusting unsuspecting people into the spotlight. And that's exactly what happened to a user named Dre Hype MSU when he posted this video of his little brother on June 22nd, 2013.
You stupid.
They're not.
What's 9 plus 10?
21.
You stupid.
I swear, siblings are so mean to each other. I'm kind of glad I'm an only child. The video eventually was played over 30 million times on Vine alone. It got around 700,000 likes and 605,000 reposts. That's not even counting the amount of times that the video has been re-uploaded onto YouTube or used as part of a Vine compilation. All that to say that the video was insanely viral, to the point where people got incredibly weird about it. Like grown adults theorising about who this boy was and making up hoaxes about him. On October 13th, 2013, an article appeared online titled 21 Kid Has Reportedly Run Away From Home and Currently Being Searched For. Read goodbye note here. The story goes that he was so tired of being bullied online that he decided to run away forever, and the only clue he was going to leave as to his whereabouts was the number 21. It was very clearly a fake news article, but some people, mostly children, believed that the young boy in the video had really run away from home. Some of these kids even made videos sharing their opinions on the missing child being bullied out of his own house. However, it was soon to be revealed that the 21 kid was alive and well and still at home, and that the entire article had been one big hoax.
They said you was missing.
I'm not missing.
Yeah, tell them, man.
This poor kid still can't get a moment's peace because an account appeared on Twitter in January 2021 calling itself 21 account. They claim to be counting down to the 10th of September 2021 when 9 plus 10 really would equal 21. And people on Twitter went absolutely crazy for it. Like, this account just got an insane amount of followers. Anyway, I hope the 21 kid is doing well wherever he ended up.
We all love peanut butter. We all love.
How do you feel about peanut butter? Pretty good, right? You know, spread a bit on toast, add some bananas on top, a little bit of honey. Perfect. Now, what about mayonnaise? Some would say it's the key to a great sandwich, although somewhat dull on its own. Now, imagine combining the two, but instead of eating it, you're going to shove it all into a syringe and shoot it up your vein. But you weren't expecting that little twist, were you? This next entry is more of a moral panic than a straightforward hoax. And, as with all of these entries, when it comes to believability, the timing is super important. The peanut butter and mayonnaise panic of 1969 stems from a series of news articles, and I use that term loosely, that claimed teenagers were shooting up all manner of sticky substances, including peanut butter and mayonnaise, to get high. The Museum of Hoaxes points to a talk at the University of Wisconsin in March as being one of the first public records of this bizarre rumour. They write that narcotics agent Laverne Storduk gave a talk at the University of Wisconsin, during which he mentioned that while speaking at high schools, he had twice been asked by students whether it was possible to get high by injecting peanut butter. He confessed that he didn't know. He'd never heard of such a thing. On the 20th of April, another story appeared out of Tucson, Arizona. It reported on the rehabilitation of young boys at the Arizona Ranch School. And the director, Marshall Chazen, is quoted as saying, "They sniff glue and they sniff gasoline and they take cough syrup. Some of them even inject peanut butter. The fat globules can make them high. They'll do anything." Sounds unbelievable, right? Getting high off fat globules? But the story ran nationwide. It appeared in multiple newspapers and was rerun throughout the summer. In July, the Arizona Daily Star was announcing that the judge of the juvenile court, Lawrence Howard, was supporting a new program of drug drug education. The article says that Howard was beginning to believe there was a new kind of addiction among Tucson youth, a needle addiction, and he said that the youngsters involved called themselves needle freaks. The paper goes on to say that these so-called needle freaks are known to inject such substances as beer, orange juice, and peanut butter into their veins, any of which could cause death. That same month, other newspapers were quoting Dr. Donald Luria, the president of the New York State Council on Drug Addiction, as saying, "Kids have injected peanut butter and mayonnaise into their veins. This can kill them. In our society, we're so oriented towards kicks that it doesn't take a hell of a lot for these kids to get involved." Now here's where things get a little interesting, because I found a song by a band called the One Way Streets, and it's called We All Love Peanut Butter, which contains multiple references to getting high, tripping out, all of that kind of stuff. It's a real banger of a song as well. I'm kind of glad I found it because I've been listening to it non-stop. Anyway, that song was released in 1967, which makes me think that this whole idea of getting high off of peanut butter has actually been around way before 1969. I did a little bit of research, and apparently peanut butter is a slang term for a certain drug. So this story could all just be a case of overhearing teenagers talking in code words about their extracurricular activities and taking it literally. Either way, probably best to stick to eating peanut butter and mayonnaise, preferably not at the same time, instead of shooting it up.
Strange, life is strange.
Growing up, I was never a big dinosaur kid. Don't get me wrong, I love Jurassic Park as much as the next gal, but I was more into T-Rex the band than T-Rex the theropod. However, if I was growing up in the city of Vernal, Utah, then I might have been more of a dinosaur nut, considering the fact that they've been given the nickname Dinosaur Land. Back in the early 1900s, paleontologist Earl Douglas had discovered dinosaur bones and fossils there, and in 1915, Woodrow Wilson made the area where they had been found a national monument, naturally called Dinosaur National Monument. Very inventive, but if it ain't broke, why fix it? The city of Vernal capitalised on its dinosaur hotspot status in 1951 by printing hunting licenses. These licenses were less of a hoax and more of a novelty marketing tactic. The Chamber of Commerce in 1958 claimed to be issuing around 60,000 a year, and that they were the best advertising they had. They're kitschy and fun and became somewhat of a collector's item, a strange piece of Americana memorabilia, and you can still get your hands on one today if you visit the Dinosaur Land Museum in Vernal. If you ask me, well worth a visit. Can you believe we have made it to the last entry on the Hoaxes Iceberg? Well, that's a lie, but the final three were pretty grim. We're talking like snuff movies, nasty things to do with kids, and I just thought there's no way that I wanted to end this iceberg series on something so morbid and unpleasant. And in the other video where I said that I didn't want to talk about this horrible, dark thing to protect my mental health, someone in the comments called me a snowflake. So I'm going to wear that title proudly. I am a snowflake. So instead of ending on all that nasty business, we're ending on a positive note, or in this case, a brown note, because our final stop on this strange journey through the world of infamous hoaxes is people shitting themselves over a Spongebob broadcast. I know I've said it before, but my God, my search history will never be the same. To understand this hoax or rumour / internet urban legend, whatever you want to call it, I first need to tell you what a brown note is. Now, according to some, the frequencies between 5 and 9 hertz have the ability to literally make you crap your pants. But it's been tested multiple times and no one has actually managed to make someone experience fecal incontinence via sound frequencies. It was even featured in an episode of Mythbusters, and thankfully nobody shat themselves on camera. However, some people do insist that the brown note is not only real, but that in 2016, a pirated broadcast of Spongebob in Brazil that included these brown note frequencies actually led to people defecating all over the place. It supposedly happened during the 2016 Summer Olympics in Brazil, and the story goes that a transmission error occurred, either through hacking or some kind of bizarre stunt, that led to a strange episode of Spongebob being shown on TVs around Brazil. Apparently, Brazilians who had fallen victim to the brown note had posted all over social media about their horrific experiences, only to be subsequently threatened by the government, who forced a cover-up of the entire ordeal because they believed it would impact tourism. Now if you're thinking, this story sounds like a load of old shit, then you're probably right. It most likely originated on 4chan, on a thread discussing lost media. These kinds of threads are rife with people that like to create their own fake lost media, because if it's supposedly lost, then nobody can really bust you for being a liar. And I know that governments are good at keeping secrets, but if thousands of people had simultaneously shit themselves, then I feel like that would have made the news in some way, cover up or not. So that's it. The Hoaxes Iceberg officially completed after just over 2 years. I kind of want to start another one now. So if you see an interesting one or you've got any requests for future video topics, then leave me a comment, drop me an email, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!
Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies.